I wanted to start off first with introducing myself, and the two back there, we will not get into any laws or regulations or anything specific to any of that, because who wants to talk about those things? My name's Eric Miller. I work at the Center for Students with Disabilities. I'll have all my contact information at the very end, as well as a place for you guys to get all of my information. My colleague, Scott, who's our assistant or associate director, my apologies, he actually had something come up in a family emergency, so he is not able to do his share of the presentation. So he was going to do the majority of the more universal design and learning, universal design and instruction piece. So I'm going to do my best to cover his information, and if I don't do a very good job, I know Elizabeth's going to continue that on either today or tomorrow. Are you guys meeting tomorrow too? No? No? Also, I can get you guys his contact information. I can field as many questions as I can. I do a lot more of the hands-on student perspective as far as the technology they use to utilize to access D2L, print materials, any web-based components. And so I have more of the fun pieces of the day today. And so I'm going to do a very general introduction to universal design and learning. I'm going to cover very basic guidelines and principles, and they are guidelines and principles. There aren't laws holding you accountable to this. It's more best practice. It's very, very hard. Perfect example, if I was to give this to a student, that fun little picture of universal design and all those words is not tagged, so a screen reader wouldn't read it. So I'm already starting off with a poor example. And then towards the middle, towards the end of this, we're going to get into some disability-specific simulations of how students are accessing the materials that you're going to be creating in D2L and other web-based components. And then I'll transition into specific software that we use here at Whitewater. There's several software assistive technology that we have deployed across the campus that students utilize and make us ADA compliant, or the Americans with Disabilities Act compliant. And then lastly, there's a bunch of resources that we threw together, some from the LTC, some from other institutions across the country that have really, really good, helpful information. And I've got all of that listed. I'll be happy to email this PowerPoint to Elizabeth, and I'm sure she can get it to all of you guys. Where did that go? Okay, so I wanted to start off with a very basic UDL at a glance. It's a really, really good video. It's really short. I think it's like 2.5 minutes. And CAST is an organization out in Massachusetts that does a lot of work with UDL. And it really summarizes it a much better way than I will. And it also is fun because it's animated and it's kind of like a cartoon. So is that big enough, or do you guys want me to go full screen? Full screen. Okay. Well, is it loud enough?
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal design for learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal design for learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have 3 broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interests and autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways, allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.cast.org.
Okay, I really thought that was a great piece that the CAST put out. I thought it, obviously we're at an institution of higher education, and that was very kind of elementary, but I think it's a great way to explain what UDL is. It explains the basic principles and kind of how we're trying to approach education in maybe a little different manner instead of, providing content in one specific way or for one specific type of learner, and trying to broaden that to get the learning aspect and all of it to all different individuals based on all sorts of different unique backgrounds and abilities. This is an image of a very, very accessible house. This is actually from an architectural website. And I just wanted to pose this question, and we really don't even have to discuss it, but looking at your classroom this way, and I know the image is very small, but on it, it has a lot of architectural code as far as 42-inch wide hallways and stairways. It's a single floor house, so it's more accessible. 36-inch wide doorways. So all of these are above ADA code to make a home extra accessible for someone, and this would be considered an exceptionally well-designed, universally designed one single-story house. And I think it kind of helps to look at this because UDL has been brought out from universal design, specifically in architecture. These are some other examples of universal design for public transit, and obviously like a automatic door opener for like a grocery store or any other type of building. And I know the video kind of spoiled this answer, but there's a great deal of individuals out there that can access that bus, that building, much easier. Like just think if you had your groceries and your phone in your hand, you know, that getting through that doorway is a lot easier than having to use your hip or foot or something. So I think looking at this much grander than specific curb cuts, architecture, and how we can put that into an online curriculum it's fun, and it is kind of engaging to me. I always look at assistive technology in a kind of spectrum, and you look at someone that wears glasses compared to someone with 20/20 vision, someone that's legally blind. You know, there's that whole spectrum in there. So you can really look at your glasses, your contacts as a means of access to see things. And I think that helps frame a lot of this and how, you know, we all have differing abilities. And I think using that example really helps. Ron Mace was the one that coined the term universal design. It was all built in architecture. He described the process of designing physical environmental features to be functionally accessible to a range of users with and without disabilities. So it's essentially a design process for everyone, not one specific type of individual in mind. And I think being able to translate that effectively to the online platform can be extremely difficult, but with utilizing some of these guidelines and principles, I think it's very doable to get access to the masses. There's always going to be those outliers, and that's, you know, where our office comes in as a huge resource for all of you. So I know the video touched on this, but I really like looking at the design process and looking at the different networks of, you know, the what, the how, and the why of learning, and kind of how our students can look at all of our lessons, all of our curriculum differently, and kind of see where they get excited about learning. I definitely know when I look at the why, and throughout my, you know, education, I really thought that's what got me. You know, why did something work like that, like in a more practical physics class or a, you know, lab science, figuring out why different things work. But other individuals would rather learn about the what and the how. So just kind of keeping those little things in mind really help us construct a better course for everyone. And I'm sure all of us know this, and this data isn't even that recent. It's from the fall of 2002 to fall 2011. It's just showing the trends of online courses. And so obviously we're going this way. Our technology is not going anywhere. It's only going to get more and more. And I think, you know, it's great that you're all in here to do this. And it's exciting. And especially for individuals with disabilities, for some students, they can't physically get here. And so an online learning platform is the only way that they may be able to access higher education. And so at times that poses more problems, but it also gets them access to something that they might not have physical access to. And that was from the Journal of Post-Secondary Education and Disability. So very basically, UDI, that's Universal Design Instruction, means that rather than designing your instruction for the average student, you design it for the potential students and the broad range of characteristics. You're really looking at designing for all, not one specific type of learner. So I embedded that video intentionally because they really push multiple modes of instruction, not straight lecture. So video, small group discussion, you know, mini presentations. I put all of my slides up on a blog and integrating other types of technology, if it's Twitter, Facebook. I was on a webinar a month ago about how an instructor, I think he was at Stanford, I can't remember, but he utilizes Twitter extensively in his online lectures. And he, you know, utilizes hashtags to continue that conversation when they're outside of the classroom. And it was really, really interesting to see how he allowed his personal social media life to be part of his professional social media life. And I know that's always kind of a, you know, scary road to go down. And he just kind of jumped off the cliff, so to speak, and just did it. And it was really, really cool to see how he met the students where they're at. I'm sure all of you know and experience how students in today's world really don't like to use email anymore. And that's a really interesting concept to think that, you know, I always think that's the best way to get a hold of them, and it's really not. And so it's just fascinating to think this way, and, you know, how can we meet and teach them the best way for all of the students. So college courses that include universal design features minimize the need to provide accommodations. That is not saying that if you designed this ultimate universally designed course, our office would disappear. There's just ways that it can make less accommodations necessarily needed for the student, or less intervention from me to help provide, textbooks or handouts in an accessible format. And so that formal accommodation process legally has to be in place. And so this is from, and this is one of the resources I'll get to, but the University of Washington has the Do-It Center. And Madison's IT department's also called Do-It, so it's very confusing. But Cheryl Burke is one of the biggest individuals out here on universal design. And I've got links to a lot of her materials, but the Do-It Center is phenomenal for any resources for faculty or any instructional pieces that you're curious about. And it's all grant funded, so it's all out there for all of us. So we have a lot of links from our faculty and staff resources page from CSD's website that links to that. Here is the breakdown of universal instructional design, universal design for learning, and then universal design of instruction. So there's kind of these three different but similar concepts, and I really don't know why Scott included this, but here is an example of all of the different principles and guidelines. And I like the middle one here because it's three principles, and it's easier to remember three things than A through H. And so there's so much crossover between the three concepts. But on the bottom, this one's from the University of Washington's Do-It Center. And through the universal design of instruction, like looking at class climate, class interaction, physical environments and products. So like this room, I've had several students in wheelchairs in this room, and it's not very accessible. There's really no accessible desk in here that I can see. So we have to figure out how we're going to accommodate that. And so working with older buildings, we do that all the time. But it's just kind of looking at those things. Delivery methods, information and resources and technology. So how can you integrate all that if it's utilizing D2L platform, blog, social media, whatnot. How you're capturing feedback from the students, if you're getting that feedback throughout the presentation or the class lecture. And then assessment, and also just your general accommodations. I'm just looking at time, so I want to make sure I get to the majority of things. So do you guys have any questions at this point? No? Okay. So determining the essentials. So just looking broadly at what does a student must be able to do by the end of the course? So that big question, well, what are your learning objectives? What do you want them to know when they're done taking English 101? What must they know instead of what you want them to know? What must they know? What must they be able to do or know how to do it? So providing a layout of how you want them to write that lit review, or how you're going to assess that lit review. And then lastly, in what ways can the student demonstrate that he or she knows the information, that he or she can do the task? So what type of assessment are you going to use? Are you going to use multiple instruction or assessment methods to get a more holistic understanding of the student's abilities, or are you going to stick to one straight assessment method? One size does not fit all. This, like I said earlier, these are guidelines, these are principles, these aren't rules, these aren't regulations. This is to create a more accessible learning environment for everyone. So with the array of options for online instructional design, there's no blueprint for incorporating UD principles into online courses. You as the instructor can apply UD principles to their online courses in a variety of ways. These are obviously up to you. Obviously, we're all very, very busy, and so sitting here and putting in extra work, I'm sure doesn't sound pleasant, but I think in the end, the outcome outweighs the front end work. And you have great resources here within the LTC, within our office for more of the disability-specific stuff to conquer some of these, mountains. I'm going to skip this because it's very small, but this goes through both the universal design in instruction and the universal design in learning. And it's kind of a nice checkbox to go through your syllabus, the textbook, additional readings, web-based content, and assignments, final projects, and it's and up top are all the principles, and to analyze your course and look at it as a whole to see how universally designed it is. And here's the second page of that. It was hard to fit on a PowerPoint slide. So why is intentional online course planning essential? And this is kind of a fun slide. So this is a series of pictures that are kind of epic fails. I don't know if you've seen any of those things online, those epic fails. So, so here's very inaccessible handicap sign. There is the accessible entrance with obviously a stairwell. That's the website we found a lot of these. It's failblog.org. So, and there's a curb cut into grass. I like this one a lot. There's a bike path with no curb cut. So I guess you're jumping that curb. Here's a very nicely plowed sidewalk. There's the accessible entrance, directly pointing towards stairwell. And I'm assuming that might not be brailled. I just thought that one was fun. So there's it's supposedly an ADA ramp with a stair at the end of it, so I wouldn't go down that. There's a pretty decent curb cut with a pole in the middle. So I think the big takeaway here is, everyone's best intentions. Most people are looking to do the right thing in life. And I think, at times, they don't lead to the best outcomes. And so he was having fun with this, I see, on Friday. So now we're getting to my stuff, which will be more hands-on. WebAIM is an absolutely wonderful organization. They're at Utah State. Utah State. They really look at creating the most accessible web, internet that you can. And so they created these disability simulations, and I thought this would be a really good place for me to kind of present these. And I thought that we could take a few minutes to go through these simulations. So there's a simulation for a screen reader. And what a screen reader is how individuals with blind and low vision access computers. It's how they write their emails. It's how they access, our homepage. And so if you haven't seen one before, it's kind of takes you away for a second because the simulation literally has a black screen and there's 3 questions that they ask of you. Find the name of the founder of the University of Antarctica, find the phone number of the U of A, and then find the current enrollment for Bio 250. We will not do this because the first time I did it, it took me like 25 minutes. But I'm not trying to scare anyone or anything. I just think this is a really helpful way to do this. So we're going to do the screen reader simulation, and then there's a distractibility one, so for individuals with ADHD. And then there's also a low vision one, which is cool because you can change it from different visual disabilities, from like glaucoma to macular degeneration and some other things. And then lastly, there is a dyslexia one, which is really interesting to look at, how a typical individual with dyslexia will interpret text and why having an auditory format is so important. And then I'm going to get into how we help assist students with the technology on campus with these specific types of disabilities. I'm not going to bring up JAWS, which is the screen reading software. I'm going to do screen magnification software, and then I'm also going to do Kurzweil 3000. So I have headphones because it would get insanely loud in here if we tried to do this. So why don't we, unless we want just me to do it up here, or do you guys want to do it hands-on? No? Does anyone have a preference? Well, I'll do this one to the masses, and then the other ones we can do. No one wants to participate. I see how it is. So besides these simulations, they have a wonderful array of resources, and they also actually have an accessibility website assessing tool. I don't know what to call it. You could literally put in your URL and it will go through the whole page and look at what and what isn't tagged as far as images and whatnot. So it's pretty interesting. So this simulation is asking us to find the last name of the founder of the university, the phone number, and the Bio 250. And so it's really, why this is so important is we did a D2L update over winter break.
University of the Antarctic Home. Table with 3 columns and 7 rows. Link, graphic, link for prospective students. Link, graphic, number 965,151,481,950. Link, graphic, number 965,151,535,990. Link, graphic, link for alumni. Link, news vertical bar. Link, calendar vertical bar. Link, campus diversity vertical bar. Link, survival classes
So if
vertical
you can
bar.
imagine, we're
Link,
going across
things
the
to do
top of that
vertical
web page
bar.
right now.
Link,
Like, so
apply
how our
vertical
website
bar.
has students,
Link, library
faculty,
vertical bar. Link, history.
students, faculty,
Link,
email,
contact
D2L.
information
So
vertical
it
bar. Link,
literally goes
class
left to
schedule
right,
vertical
jumping
bar.
from
Beauty
link
award
to
winning.
link
Link,
to
artwork
image.
from the ice. Exhibit, table N. Image map link, UOPA/search. Image map link, link to site index. Image map link, link to information about U of A.
Ooh, I missed it. As you can imagine, individuals that use this technology, and I'm not going to keep going on the simulation, individuals that need this technology to be successful in your classes know what they're doing. It always it impresses me a very, very great deal when I have a student and he or she will pull out their laptop and pull up D2L or their email in 30 seconds. And they have no access to seeing what they're doing with keyboard shortcuts and what they know. But on the flip side, why this is important and why I wanted to show this is if you are putting documents, and we'll get into this, if you're uploading documents to D2L, adding any type of material, if that's inaccessible, JAWS or any other screen readers won't be able to detect that. So if you have a PDF that's untagged, it just shows up as an image, and it can't read an image. And so that's where the difficulty lies in making sure things are tagged or are appropriately made accessible. And there's a plethora of resources on how to do that we're going to provide you. Okay. So here's the low vision simulation. And so the instructions ask you to get in here, and this is the simulation they built for this one. The tasks are right here. And so using the cataract type, so we're going to change it to cataract, and then zoom to 3,000%. And so this is where like a screen magnification software comes into play. A lot of students will use the basic accessibility features in computers. Other students will purchase software. If they're on a campus, they can access ZoomText completely for free because the university covers that to make sure we're in compliance. And so it's asking us to find the indexed image map. And so here is that screen magnified at 3,000%. And I believe it's down here because I probably cheated. Well, I thought I cheated. So just to kind of give you guys a better understanding of how some students are accessing your materials, the nice thing about Adobe, even though I hear from a lot of the students I work with that they absolutely hate Adobe because the vast majority of them aren't accessible, the great thing about Adobe is it has all the Zoom functions built right into it. You can search those PDFs as well very easily. And so there are a lot of tools that can help students access materials within a PDF. It just needs to be built correctly. So let's just go to, just to look at kind of the different visual disabilities I have on here. Let's zoom back out 100%. So here would be a normal sighted individual. Here's macular degeneration, which is essentially a blank spot in the middle of your retina. And then lastly, here's the cataract or the glaucoma example. And so you may be asking, are we talking about 5 students on campus? I know this last semester we had 50 students with visual impairments, all the way from completely legally blind to individuals that are requesting 20 font. So there's a very big spectrum. Okay. So here's the dyslexia simulation. Okay. So this is explaining how dyslexia is experienced, letter reversal, word reversal. So, someone may see the word tip but read it as pit. Inversions, so a W and an M may flip, a U and an N. Transpositions, so felt for left, may confuse small words just because they're, see them so frequently. They may see, does for goes and said for and. And obviously that's going to affect their writing, their reading comprehension, and their spelling. And so here's more of an introduction, and here's the simulation. And so if we were doing this, actually, and I think it would be cool if I don't know if any of you teach like special ed or anything, this would be kind of a cool way to talk about learning disabilities and specifically reading comprehension disabilities. But this gives you 1 minute to read this paragraph, and then there's a series of multiple choice questions that they ask you. So as you can see, the text is quite jumbled. You can see, the word images right here, and the W and the M flipped. That's supposed to be loud. Reading disorder. So then here, they're actually open-ended questions. So asking you about web accessibility and who would be negatively impacted by text-only sites. Some really, really well-designed websites have the text-only option, which will extract all pictures and images that aren't very important to the content, which can be really helpful if you're using any type of speech-to-text or auditory projection. Like the really nice thing about Macs is if you highlight any text on the Mac and hit Command on it, you can just start speaking and it will read to you, which we have a lot of students that utilize that, which is nice too because that's just on all Macintosh computers. There's nothing that needs to be purchased. So then lastly, the last simulation that I wanted to show you guys was the distractibility one. So this would be, the frustrations similar to someone with, ADHD or ADD. Where did my cursor go? This one's really hard. They kind of made a video game. So.
Oh, quit it. Oh, quit it. Oh, quit it.
So they're asking you to catch these little grenades or bombs or whatever as you need to do these simulation tasks over here, which I think's a pretty extreme example, but for some of our students, I think it's fairly accurate. So all the links to this stuff is out there for you guys to play around if you want to gain a better kind of understanding of who may be in your classroom. Do you guys have any questions from any of the other stuff that we've talked about? Okay, so I was going to do a brief demonstration of both ZoomText and Kurzweil 3000. Kurzweil 3000 is a software that started as strictly a tool for individuals with low vision and blindness, and it's really broadened into a tool for all learners. I know a lot of K-12 districts will not utilize this only for students in special education because they've broadened the writing tools within it and the brain mapping and brainstorming tools. And so I wanted to briefly give you guys an overview of these two technologies and then cover a few other things. So here is Kurzweil 3000 in a nutshell. I wanted to show you here, what I did before I walked over here was I uploaded my PowerPoint. A lot of students do this. What the program does is it's called optical character recognition. The program's built to go through the document and figure out what the letters are, and it forms words. It essentially, Ray Kurzweil, the inventor, created a software, and yeah.
Does this work on, you mentioned PowerPoints earlier and having them tag, or not PowerPoints, PDF, and having them tag. There are at least two ways that I know of creating a PDF. One is by converting a Word document to a PDF, which is a very clean, very small, very nice PDF.
Yeah.
And then there's the scan to PDF. Does this work with both varieties?
Yeah, it does. When you scan to PDF, are you talking about like from a copy machine or something like that? Yeah.
Or something comes in, let's say you press something by interlibrary loan, that's
Yep.
frequently a scan.
Yep.
version of a
Yeah.
PDF. They're called the same, the sizes are different.
Yep.
The quality is usually a little bit less on the scanned one, but often it's the only way we can get it. And this will work on both, and the tagging that you mentioned will sufficiently identify both varieties of PDF to the same accessibility.
It depends, but yes.
And then lastly, how do we ensure that that our documents are tagged properly and that they're available such that this can get them and read them for the students in our D2L sites?
Elizabeth, do you guys have any quick tools to see if they're tagged? Because basically how I operate is it's when a student can't access it, which is a horrible way to, it's reverse engineered, but there's really,
I run a test on the front end.
yeah, I mean, that would be the preference is to do that. And especially if you're not creating it yourself, you wouldn't be tagging it, obviously. To tag, and when you say tag, we're like tagging charts, pictures, graphs, anything that is a visual representation that isn't text. Because within Adobe, it will actually go through and read the PDF. And now it's awesome that the campus has the Adobe Pro, which you need to do the accessibility tests. So if you had Adobe Pro on your computer, you could do what is called an accessibility test. So if you go up into tools on the right, you can pull up all of Adobe's tools. And the LTC made an awesome wiki page on this, on both how to test for accessibility and also how to add anything to that PDF to make it accessible. So what that accessibility tool will do is it'll go through and read the document and it will pull out all pictures, all charts, all graphs. And if there's no tag on the back end of it, because the tag you don't see, then you can add that. Were you gonna add something?
Nope.
Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
What would you add in a tag? I mean,
So like for this picture, for example, I would probably add, 3 cartoon figures holding a pencil.
once you just verbally describe it.
Yeah. So all websites are supposed to have tagged images. So if I pulled up the UWW homepage, that main picture on our homepage, if it's the Warhawk football team, we'll say University of Wisconsin Warhawk football team at Stag Bowl 2014 or whatever.
And then lastly, like, for a lot of the PDFs or the articles that students read in my classes, I want them to go to the online databases to get them.
Yep.
I don't want to select them as a PDF and then put them on my D2L site.
Yep.
I want them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and do you use like primarily EBSCOhost and
I use
those?
the shared electronic collection.
Okay.
At the Anderson Library. And what I do is give students a bibliographic reference
Okay.
and tell them what collection it's in and let them go find it.
Okay.
So will it be in that readable form when it comes off of that shared electronic collection?
I don't know. Maybe.
And is there
Maybe not. Through Adobe, we'd have to run that accessibility test.
on each individual?
Correct. You could do it you could combine all the PDFs and make like a mass reader and do one big accessibility test.
But I don't want to deliver it to students.
Correct. But I'm saying to, just kind of double check and make sure it's, accessible. That's an option. But for a lot of our students that are using screen readers, they're not using this software program. But this program will do everything that Adobe Pro will do as far as pulling out and extracting the text and providing audio to it. Did that answer your questions?
Yeah, I think so.
There's a lot of gray.
Who do I send my course to have it checked to make sure that all this works?
What happens generally is I work really closely with the students that this is going to impact. and together. And I don't think this is the best solution to this, but it's just kind of how it's been managed for the last several years. And so, you know, I'll work with him or her, and we'll jump on D2L and see what they're working with. Sometimes it works really well, and there's, you know, nothing we have to do. Other times there's a great deal. I have 2 students in a summer course this summer that we're going to have a lot of work to do these next couple of weeks because there's so many, everything's in D2L, and some of those HTML, you know how you can do those HTML pages? And the pop-up is very hard for her to get her screen reader into. And so I'm predicting that we're going to have to essentially take all of those out and make some type of Word doc for her.
And you'll do that for the student?
Yeah. I mean, I oversee several student workers that work closely with me to provide all these materials in whatever format. If it's Braille, large print, audio, it just depends on what they're utilizing to access it. And that's what's so difficult is that, you know, there's this wide spectrum of students utilizing it, and then there's also, you don't know necessarily what you're getting from, you know, the source. Like EBSCOhost just started. They are starting for all newer articles. They have a embedded MP3 player, which is great for some of our students because they can pull up the article, and then instead of printing it, they can just, you know, hit play and grab it that way, and then also print it for their resources. Yeah.
Question, if this is an online class, for example, in the summer, and the student is not physically on campus, what if you, is there a way then that you check the course itself or tagging, you know, like, you know, you were asking,
What
is there somebody we send the course to if people are not?
What generally happens is I'll get added as a lecturer or a student or, you know, a co-instructor, and then I'll just go in and usually not a co-instructor because then I could see grades, usually a guest lecturer, and then I can go in and access course content, and then I, you know, download and, you know, convert as much as we need. So that would probably be the easiest solution for an online course. Or the best solution would be going to that publisher or whomever you're getting the materials from and saying that the materials aren't accessible and seeing if they'd be able to provide you an accessible copy. Because that's what we do a lot of, is instead of us doing it, you know, legally and technically they're supposed to be providing these in accessible formats. The Higher Education Reauthorization Act made that part of it, and it just isn't followed very well. Okay, so this software program, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time just to show you kind of how students are accessing things. So I have, we have 2 students going to Yellowstone this summer with George Clokey in his geology class, and I just wanted to briefly show you how the program works. The universal library that students access their materials are all cloud-based. Any student that requests any of their materials in this program, this is how they would access it. It's very similar to a CD player.
Yellowstone Park and Protection Act in 1872, the U.S.
There's all these different reading components, Zoom, words per minute. The kind of cooler features that I wanted to show you is there's all these different highlighters. There's a sticky note feature. So, you know, if some of this was on quiz 1, you know, you can add notes and things like this because you can physically save this electronically on your computer and then go back to refer it. So they were able to manipulate a lot of things that students do in a traditional textbook electronically and then save those things. I just wanted to quickly show you the writing tools I was talking about. And this is where in K-12 they use a lot of this in smartboards to teach students the writing process and whatnot. But within here, there's like a brainstorm feature. So, and they have all these different templates. So like, let's say I was writing a cause and effect essay or something. So then this will open up a really nice visual representation of, you know, a typical paper. This is all customizable.
Of World War.
So let's say theoretically I spend a lot of time on this, build a really nice outline. You can do a split screen view here, which will flip that into a traditional outline, and then you can start typing this and save it as a Word doc. You know, it's a tool that I'd really like to see partnering with some English classes, especially maybe some remedial English classes, to really help, you know, support writing and whatnot. Briefly, Zoom Text. This is the screen magnification program. If you guys are, obviously the majority of this is going to be online, but if you teach traditional classes, if you're in a classroom, all general access labs
Windows
have
font smoothing has been enabled on this system. Zoom Text Reader. App Reader. Synthesizer. Reading options. Use screen reading speech rate not checked. Use screen reading. Zoom Text user interface.
So here is Zoom Text. I just wanted to briefly show you this. I'm at 2x magnification. Obviously, you guys heard the reader. That is easily disabled because it's kind of tough to listen to that as you're navigating with the magnification. The really nice thing about this program is you can change the colors. So if there's a student that has contrast issues, they can revert the colors. So here's all these different schemes. So you know, you could do yellow on black, which is typically, if students do have any type of contrast issue, this is, you know, the most helpful. So I didn't want to spend much time on that because I want to get to more basics with course construction here and kind of accessible PDFs and whatnot. So here is a slide on creating accessible PDFs, and on the very bottom it says, now it's your turn, but because of time issues, we're not going to play with that. Adobe PDF documents can be made extremely accessible. It just takes a little bit of work. So the document becomes searchable by text file and not only image. So if you take a book, slap it on a copier, scan it, you know, and email it to you, or however you want to do that, that is going to save as an image. And so none of that is accessible, essentially. So you can go through the process of creating that accessible through the accessible assessor tool, and then also the alt tagging piece. Typically, by running that, it does almost everything automatically. There's very little you end up having to do unless it's a picture-heavy or graph-heavy document. All graphs, links, and form fields have descriptive text. All that's on the back end, so it's not like myself as a sighted individual is going to see an image on a PDF and then also see the alternative text version. It's just going to be the image. Document fonts allow characters to be extracted. So if a document is completely accessible, you literally can go through and copy and paste this. You can extract the text right out of it. And if that's a concern, like if it's you know, something that is copyrighted and, you know, students shouldn't be able to copy and paste right through it, you can lock the PDF as well. Here are several links, and I'll email this to you guys because I didn't put the actual URLs because some of them are really long. The second one, the LTC one, I used a tremendous amount when I had no clue what I was doing. I got my master's in counseling. I learned all of the technology stuff the last 4.5 years of my professional life. And so when I didn't know where to go, the LTC helped me quite a bit. And then I found other really, really powerful resources from Kent State. Here's one from Adobe. The third one is all from Adobe. And this last one, this accessibility at Mason, they have a whole accessibility center on campus for their instructors. And they have this wonderful PDF. And it's like a really, really long document. But they go through all different types of docs, Word docs, PowerPoints, PDFs, and how to create them accessible. It goes through the different parts of Adobe, 11 and 10. It talks about Word 11 in 2010 and 2011, making accessible PowerPoints. It talks a little bit about web accessibility. So this is a great resource, and I saved multiple trees by not printing it out. So Videos. I just wanted to briefly touch on this. Captioning is very, very important. If you have any deaf students in your course, you'll be contacted by us. All the colleges have a tech liaison that would be able to work with you in your specific college to get your video captioned. I am already over time, so I'm not going to show. I have an awesome video on YouTube of the auto captioning on YouTube, because a lot of times you're like, oh great, it's it's captioned. On YouTube you can just hit the CC button and it's really, really, really bad. And these guys made this video just to kind of poke fun at how bad it was.
I think you should show it. I'm presenting after you,
Okay.
and I'm not
Okay.
offended.
Okay.
So,
I will show it then. So if you're working with us, if you need to work with us, we do it all in-house. Typically the LTC takes care of the captioning piece, or we'll work directly with the creator of it to get a captioned video of it. A lot of times the library is able to find the captioned version, and we got one professional staff member that works with all of our deaf, hard of hearing students, and she sends those emails out very, very early, because it can be a very large process and long process with a lot of people not getting back to you. Okay, this is all because of Elizabeth. It's funny. These guys are actually very funny.
YouTube videos have this closed caption option now where you can click the little CC button and it'll display text on the screen for what's being said in the video.
The whole process is automated. A computer listens to the video and displays what it thinks it hears, so the results are always off and usually pretty hilarious.
So, we had this idea to play telephone with YouTube transcriptions.
We wrote a script, filmed it, and uploaded the video to YouTube. Then we downloaded the computer's transcript and used that as our script for round 2.
Then, we uploaded that to YouTube to get another script, which became round 3.
We've included the text on the screen to make it easier to understand what we're saying.
Enjoy.
Hey man.
Hey, I've been trying to reach you for the past hour. What have you been doing?
Oh, nothing. I was just polishing my Little League MVP trophy.
Is that a euphemism for something?
No. What are you eating?
Or 100% organic free-range black bean vegan burrito?
How can a black bean be free range?
I don't know, Google it. You'll never guess what I'm holding in my hand right now.
An iPhone?
I got tickets to the Lady Gaga Putt-Putt Tournament of Monster Truck Rally.
With the opening act, Little People with Piercings?
Yes!
I can't believe it. You're my best friend, man. When do we go?
Actually, I'm not taking you. I'm taking Elise, my 8-year-old niece.
You mean the niece has been trapped in that goat cheese making cult in southern Venezuela?
Well, it's a llama butter making cult in South Carolina, but yeah.
Well, next time you want to call me and not invite me to something, then just don't call me at all.
Well, next time you don't want to be happy for me when my niece is released from a cult and gets to go with me to an amazing concert, don't answer your phone.
Fine.
Fine.
So that was the transcript they uploaded. That's why it was perfect. So here's Google's turn, or YouTube's.
Hey, man.
Anytime we put that style, what you been doing?
Well, nothing, which is polishing my Little League MVP traffic.
Resenting you for missing into something?
No. What are you eating?
Or 100% organic, free range, but the Indian retail.
Part of my baby free range.
Parallel to collect. Never guess what I'm holding in my hand right now.
Marathon.
Advantages to the Lady Gaga puppet Tenemos a drug ride.
With the opening at Little People would be a Sensta?
U.S.
But do you believe it? Your best friend. When we get?
Actually, I'm not taking it to get at least 9-year-old niece.
You mean he's been trapped in a goat cheese making calls a network?
Was a lot about meeting. Construct a line of the year.
Without anyone calm united by minister to the so-called me at all.
Well, next time you don't want to be happy for me, woman eases release from a cotton disability to an amazing concert donating your poem.
5.
5.
Hey, man.
Anytime, but that's how we've handled one.
I think what you're talking about, the legality traffic.
Resenting your permissiveness something?
No. What are you reading?
Oracle Organic Free Range, but being in retail.
Part of a difference free range?
Parallel to collect. Never guess what I'm holding in my hand right now.
Marathon.
Advantages of the Lady Gaga puppets and a lot of Iraq.
With the other email, it would be a sense that?
You pets!
But it was a bit. Your best friend. When we get?
Action not taking a dig, at least 9-year-old niece.
You mean he's been trapped in a goat cheese making calls a network?
Was a lot about meeting, construct a line in the year.
Without anyone called, united by minister to the so-called me at all.
Well, next time you know one of the happy for me at a news release from a cotton, This ability to an amazing concert, donating your poll. Facts! You still there?
So obviously that was an extreme case, but it's funny. I've kind of gotten the habit of turning on the automated captions just to see how horribly bad they are, because it's really, really entertaining if they didn't do it the correct way. The moral of the story is just because YouTube has that automated feature, it's usually very inaccurate. So I only have a few more to go. Or I might be done. Here are more links. CAST is where the initial, this is kind of links in kind of reference page. CAST was the very first video I showed. The University of Washington's Do It. Extensive research. They put out probably every 2 years a new document. It's a completely, it's a completely free downloadable PDF. Obviously they made it accessible because that'd be kind of highly contradictory. Great resource. University of Connecticut site devoted to UDI for faculty. There is a brochure right here from Ohio State's site and Scott Listener. And then there's another overview document. More links. And then there's my contact information. The last several pages, you guys, I made a blog page just for this presentation if you wanted to access it here. But when I get back to my office, I can email the PowerPoint. So I just embedded that video and then linked to the simulations and then included a few of the resources. So I believe that was everything. Yes. So do you guys have any questions?
Hi.
Yeah.
So, from your professional experience, what are the most common issues that you've run into in terms of accessibility in online blended courses?
I think the biggest is what we were just talking about is the uploading to D2L documents, and if it is just a plain image or if it's something that's accessible. That is the biggest problem. Or if it's a bigger problem that's part of that problem is if that document is highlighted or underlined or the scan of it was poor, and you know how you can put something on a scanner and if it's not flat, you have the bend here. All of those words, so all the words here, if this is the margin, all those words when they start to bend, when you go through creating it to be accessible, all those words start getting manipulated to non-English words. And so in the past, we've had students end up having to, not the student receiving it, but I've had student workers type it. I've had to type up documents and things just because, you know, the PDF looks like this. Underlining, highlighting, any of that text is gonna be tried to be OCR'd, and that creates, you know, problems. So the cleaner the scan, the cleaner the PDF is, the better it is. Obviously, D2L has its limitations, but we've been able to work around them and make them as accessible. A lot of students may or may not take an online course because of their fear of them, but I don't really direct students away from them because I think if that's the platform they want to learn, you know, they should have access to that.
What do you do with documents in cursive? I use a lot of documents, historical documents in original hand.
I don't know. That's a new one.
Probably need to get transcribed.
Yeah.
And at previous institutions I've been with, that's what happened. They'd have to get transcribed.
Because we work with for a lot of videos, if captioning isn't available, the kind of last case, you know, workaround is getting a transcription of that video, and that'd be something that, you know, we could work with you to get the transcriptions of those manuscript.
But if the form of the document is as important as the words, how do I deal with that with a student in class? That's part of the.
What kind of course is it?
You'd be a big fan. The rest of my students would be a huge fan of it because sometimes what we do is actually work through transcribing documents so they can see what an original hand is, determining, we don't do handwriting expert stuff, but determining sometimes who are matching documents and who might have written them,
Okay.
authenticity, that kind of stuff. And there it's important to have it in its original form.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the question would be, how to assess the student if they can't physically see the handwriting.
Yeah, that's a deeper question.
Yeah.
And it's a significant component and, in fact, a learning objective in the course.
Absolutely, and that's where this gets very gray. Is how do we accommodate that student to access your learning objectives and be able to, effectively be assessed what he or she knows. And how we do that, I would definitely need to do some research and consult with other people because I don't know. That's a completely new one as far as if part of that is knowing how to analyze the handwriting in the document itself, and if that student can't access it, that doesn't seem like that student would be able to do that. So how would you assess them learning that ability?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a good question. Too good of one for after a long weekend. We can talk. Obviously, if a student's not enrolled in your course, it's not an issue, which isn't the best solution to a problem. But what type of course is it?
It's a
Like
history
history?
course. There are two courses, actually two that are, one that's online already, one that's going online.
Okay.
And we use, and this is quite frankly, it's a constant, I'm not baiting you for this question, it's a serious question. It's a constant battle I have with students who don't have visual impairments.
Yeah.
That they see this, and I can pull that up and I'm just thinking about it. They see this and panic, and absolute panic. And we push through it every semester.
Okay.
I can show you some of the stuff later.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to,
I know,
grab a cup of coffee and we can talk about it.
Highly enrolled classes.
Yeah.
And they, last summer, and I don't know how she navigated it, I did have a student with a visual
Yeah.
impairment in the class last summer, and she did navigate it. I guess one of the questions would be to ask her and say,
Yeah,
I
and it,
didn't want to single her out.
yeah, absolutely.
How did you do that? 'Cause
Well-
I don't want it to sound accusatory. Like,
Yeah.
clearly you couldn't have done that. How did you do that? I really want to know, what did you do?
Well, and I know students in the past that we've, had to provide a human to narrate what they were seeing. Like I had a student do a completely, it was a Half-Life, part of it was on Half-Life.
Second one.
And there we go, second, isn't it, Half-Life's a video game, right? Isn't it a first-player shooter game? That was from my childhood. And we ended up having to have someone help her visualize what, I'm sure it's the same student we're talking about.
Yeah, well, yes, we worked through the student
Yeah,
together. last summer.
yeah.
I think that's, and in the other course, it's a frequently offered course, so students will, I'm certain that this question will come up with a real student very soon.
Yeah. Well, let's talk yeah, absolutely. Any other questions, concerns? Yeah.
With the YouTube question, so you said that if it's not captioned, then you have to go through the process of having it captioned. It's a very long process.
Well, it can be. Sometimes it goes very quickly, but other times it doesn't go very quickly. But there's all of your colleges have your tech liaison, and the process that we've kind of written for, and there's some money set aside for each college to access funds directly to offset the cost of captioning. And so that would be, less of a burden on your department or your college. And so by contacting, the tech liaison, that would trigger, all the necessary steps to get that captioned.
So is there ever stuff that just doesn't get captioned? Or?
Sometimes, and that's when we'll get like a narration of it, or we'll have a interpreter come in and do C-print. So C-print's like real-time captioning. And so the interpreter will be in there with the laptop. The student will have a laptop, and they'll basically in real time caption the video. That's kind of the worst case scenario, but it's definitely works. I mean, for all this, there's, you know, at some point, some type of workaround, and that's just kind of how we have to deal with some of these things. But the best, you know, way to handle that, if you did have a student that's requesting captioning, is that, you know, you'd follow up with your tech liaison, you know, as soon as possible if it's a class for the fall, and, you know, make sure that any type of video, and on the other side of the thing, the hard part is you don't always know what you're going to use in class. And so if this is something, you know, that's a current event or something that's newer, you know, that piece can be difficult, so.
I got one.
Okay.
So what advice do you have for, I guess, best practices in D2L?
Best practices in D2L. Wow.
I'm asking you what is broken the most, and what is causing you the most headaches.
Well, we've gotten through the majority of them with the updates, personally. I know sometimes students can really struggle with the discussion boards, but they're such an integral part to an online course. And so I've worked with a lot of students to help them navigate it. And there's some settings that the student can do on their end to make things more accessible. So like the download features, you can make it so it automatically downloads instead of doing a pop-up. And sometimes those pop-ups don't work within D2L as far as if you're using a screen reader. But the majority of that is on the student end and my end with their work, because that obviously isn't your responsibility to know as an online instructor to how to enable different accessibility features. Because there are some accessibility features as far as font and stuff that the student can change in their preferences, that we have some very short handouts that we help students walk their way through. But ultimately, the biggest piece is really the accessibility of the documents that are going into D2L. Really is the biggest piece that we run into problems.
And then in terms of files, I'm thinking video files, audio files, things like that. What are the best types that should be put in there?
MP4s work really well for video. I was just at a presentation in Madison last week, and I don't have it on the top of my head, and this wouldn't fall on you guys, but it was a very inexpensive captioning software if you were making your own video. And I can get the name of it to you, but it was like $50, and you owned the software. It wasn't like a one-year license. And he walked us through. It was a training on just accessibility features on Apple devices, and so he was just using iMovie and creating, because he was showing how easy it was to make a completely accessible video with iMovie, and it was, I did kind of really open my eyes, like, these are the types of things that we can help, instructors do. But obviously that is, what the LTC is for too. But MP4s, I think Word docs can be the best sometimes, because you're not dealing with any of the other issues that come along with PDFs. Most Word docs present very little to no problems for our students as far as accessibility, as far as the accessibility front.
Have you ever had problems with HTML5 files? Basically embedded videos,
Yeah.
embedded games.
We haven't yet, and I don't know if that's because we haven't had a student enrolled in one, or they didn't complain to the right person, or I can't really answer that.
Okay.
I would imagine there might be some, but HTML5 is supposed to be really, really accessible.
Right, which is why I was
Yeah.
concerned.
Yeah, but I haven't heard anything, so it's kind of either that's a really good thing, or it doesn't mean that they're necessarily working with our office either. So.
Do you have any experience with math type?
Math type. Is it?
It's a link to objects in Word documents that are mathematical formula.
Okay. No, and that is always kind of problematic, or can be problematic, not specifically math type, because I haven't heard of it or have had a student with it, but that's, depending on how the student's accessing the material, if they're utilizing like a Braille display, math is coded differently. And so it gets transcribed into Nimith code from your traditional arithmetic. And so there's not a lot out there. Freedom Scientific, the maker of a lot of these Braille displays, is working very, very hard to do that because there's very limited resources to get students that access. I'd be intrigued though to see what a screen reader, how it would read some of those more complex mathematical equations. And that's something that, you know, we could definitely, you know, just kind of troubleshoot just to see, just for our own curiosity. Because I had a student that was struggling with the new academic advising report that comes out as a PDF, because it's great that you can actually get it exported into something more, you know, prints nicer. But she was like concerned. She's like, well, is that accessible? And it was very, very accessible. So that was a good thing. So.
How do the screen readers, kind of the same line, how do the screen readers deal with footnotes when they come across them? Does it at the end of the paragraph, or at the end of the sentence, does it just say, you know, and that's the way it is, one, and then starts with the next one? Or does it recognize the footnote as a footnote and then go down to it?
No, it would read the one if it was the first footnote, and then at the end of the page, it would read all the footnotes. Yep, yeah. So it reads left to right by column. So if it's like a APA psych article, it won't read across the columns and, you know, totally screw everything up, for lack of better words. It will read the column, go down, read the line, and then go back to the top. It can assess that, but for footnotes, it won't jump down, which makes, you know, navigating documents, you know, it can make them more complicated.
And it doesn't recognize it as a footnote number, then it just recognizes the number one.
Correct, correct. So I've done some things with students, you know, taking physics courses and stuff, as far as just providing them narrations of all the images. Like for, you know, chapter 1, here is a list of all, you know, figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure, you know, and so she had access to all those images because it was such an image-heavy course. And not just images, but graphs and charts and all those things. So depending on the materials and what the requested accommodations are, you know, that's when we definitely should work together to make sure that, you know, everything within the course can be accessible to that student.
That's my theater.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. You were a great audience. So I hope.